Our true story is about Joy, who tells of strange things that happened to her in her house, until she discovered that a ghost was dominating the house and trying to drive her out to the point of trying to kill her. Our story begins with Joy, who lived with her family in a house in Charlotte, New York. One day, after Joy turned 16, she started to feel like there were eyes watching her. A negative energy in every corner of the house gave her the feeling that she was always being watched. But Joy didn't pay it much attention, especially since she lived with her father and mother, until Joy became independent from the house and decided to hire servants for her father and mother to help them in the house. But with the first servant who entered the house, he began to feel the same feelings that Joy had felt, and the first servant ran away without even taking his pay. And Joy continued to hire servants and maids whose presence didn't last more than a week, and their explanations were that there was an evil spirit residing in the house, but they refused to speak out of fear of it. And as the years passed, Joy got married, and her husband lived with her for a period in her parents' house. And he felt the same feeling as Joy, that there were hostile eyes watching him. Until they left the house, and Joy lived with her husband for a long time, until her father and mother died and the house became completely empty. And years passed until one day, Joy had to travel for a period to Charlotte and stay in her house for a while. According to her words, Joy reached the house at 11:30 p.m., exhausted from the travel, to reach her huge green-gray house, which she called the Great Gray Barn because of its shape. Joy remembered that she had locked all the doors and windows before she left the last time after her mother's death. So Joy took out the key from her bag to open the front door, but the strange thing was that it wouldn't open. Joy was surprised and tried several times, but to no avail, so she decided to try the back door of the house. But the same thing that happened with the front door occurred. Joy tried all the doors and windows of the house, but to no avail, until she remembered the small window that leads to the basement, so she decided to crawl in through it, and as soon as she entered, she securely closed the window. And finally, Joy was inside the house looking at the locked doors, until she discovered that the windows were locked from inside the house. Joy was surprised because it was impossible for her to have locked them and left through the window. So she began to search the house, but didn't find any evidence that someone had entered the house in her absence. Until suddenly, while Joy was searching the house, she noticed that the velvet closet door was pierced with regular holes in a strange shape. Joy approached a little until she discovered that it was pierced with an ice pick, which is used in breaking ice. And the holes were as if they were an exact replica of her in length and size. Joy looked around her and found pieces of fabric and trash around the closet door, indicating that the door had been recently drilled through. However, she couldn't find the ice-breaking tool anywhere in the house. Continuing her search, Joy felt scared and confused, but remained vigilant. Despite finding nothing, her fear persisted. She made sure all doors and windows were locked before heading to the bathtub. There, she suddenly felt watched. Joy undressed, trying not to think, but as soon as she settled in the bathtub, she heard heavy footsteps descending the stairs. Quickly dressing, she speculated about who might have broken into her house, intending harm. Joy stood, staring at the mirror reflecting the area beyond the stairs, where the footsteps continued but no one appeared, until suddenly the sound ceased. Terrified, she left the bathroom, inspected the stairs, and found no one. She decided against continuing her bath and returned to her room until morning. The next day, Joy began organizing the house where she'd be staying temporarily during a break agreed upon with her husband to decide on their future together. Despite trying to lead a normal life, she noticed items moving from their places daily, but attributed it to forgetfulness or imagination. Determined, she placed objects like vases, linens, and books in specific spots, only to find their positions altered the next day. Vases moved, linens removed, and books reorganized. Convinced a malevolent spirit with differing tastes inhabited her house, Joy initially scoffed at her thoughts but could find no other explanation for the occurrences. She decided to ignore these changes to avoid madness. Days passed, and Joy noticed the disappearance of valuable embroidered napkins from the dining table, which she eventually found in the storage room. Despite returning them to their place, challenging the spirit she believed resided in her home, the napkins vanished completely. Joy theorized the spirit had taken them back to its era. One day, while cleaning, she witnessed a statue move and shatter before her eyes, leading her to store all statues and antiques in the storage room to avoid further stress. Continuing her life, a friend suggested writing about her experiences to alleviate stress. Joy began documenting everything, feeling engaged in a battle with a determined spirit, trying to drive her from the house. As strange phenomena increased, Joy felt unsure of how to proceed. One day, Joy found the electric stove turning on and off by itself until one day she woke up to the smell of burning. Suddenly, she saw smoke filling the entire house. She quickly went downstairs, struggling to breathe, with all doors and windows locked until she reached the oven, which had turned into a charred mass. She discovered that a chicken inside the oven was the cause of the incident. Joy ran to the doors and windows, trying to open them, but they were all locked with keys kept in her bedroom. With difficulty, she made her way back to her room, feeling faint, and returned to the door to unlock it, only to find it had opened by itself. Collapsing, Joy began to feel the conflict had escalated to a matter of life or death. Before she could contemplate her next move, she heard the telephone ringing. Rushing to it, she found it was her friend Alan, who sensed she was in danger and wanted to check on her. After Joy recounted what had happened, Alan decided to come over immediately with 4 of Joy's friends who worked in the theater. They decided to stay with Joy both to reassure her and to practice for a play. Suddenly, while sitting together, they heard the sound of a doorknob turning, and the door opened before their eyes. Joy's friends were puzzled, as it seemed impossible for the door to open that easily without human intervention. Before they could ponder further, they saw the basement door opening and closing on its own, as if someone had entered and closed it behind them. The basement door was too heavy for one person to lift, so much so that Joy usually left it open or needed help to open it. This made Joy's friends believe the strange events occurring around her. After 2 days, each of them began making excuses to leave, but Joy knew they were scared. Despite this, she decided to stay in the house. The events continued until December 1968. One day, after taking a shower, Joy was sitting in the living room, waiting for a friend and reading a newspaper, when she suddenly felt movement around her. She looked towards a cabinet as its door opened on its own, as if someone was coming out of it. Suddenly, a large amber pitcher emerged from the cabinet, hanging in the air and moving towards her. Joy was petrified, unable to move as she watched the pitcher fall before her eyes, shattering into tiny pieces from the impact. Joy felt that if the pitcher had fallen on her head, it would have surely killed her, but she found no explanation for what had happened. By February, Joy had separated from her husband and knew she would have to live in the house for an extended period until she traveled to Mexico for a work trip. 3 months had passed when Joy and her friend Vera returned home. The very next day, Joy was awakened by Vera, who was trying to wake her up. Joy opened her eyes and suddenly saw Vera staring intently at a spot in the room, unable to take her eyes off it. Joy looked to find her leather shoe torn into strips. Vera joked that it seemed the mice at Joy's place were quite bold. However, Joy knew it was impossible for a mouse to cut a pair of her shoes so uniformly. She remembered how she had carelessly thrown her shoes in the room the night before due to exhaustion. Vera's voice, pointing to a strangely wrapped pillow on the other bed with giant handprints as if forcefully pressed, interrupted her thoughts. Vera broke down, insisting that if Joy didn't call the police, she would. Joy indeed called the police, showing them the giant handprints and the shredded shoe. The officer looked around and mentioned it seemed like the house was haunted since there were no signs of forced entry. The police decided to check on Joy periodically for her safety, leading to Joy and Detective Chris becoming friends. Eventually, the acting district attorney gave her a spare gun, taught her how to use it, feeling she might be in danger, and told her to inform Lieutenant Johnson and Detective Chris anytime she had to return home late. One night, Joy came home late and contacted them. One stood at the front door while the other accompanied Joy to the back door. As they opened it, the front door also burst open unexpectedly, which Joy had locked before leaving. Suddenly, they smelled gas filling the house. The lieutenant rushed to the stove to find all the burners on, quickly turned them off, and opened all doors and windows to ventilate the gas. They stayed until they were sure Joy was safe. Suddenly, the stereo turned on by itself, playing a record at an accelerating speed, terrifying them all. They searched the house until they reached Joy's bedroom, where they found her underwear hanging on the door filled with paper cuttings. Then they saw Joy's monkey doll with its mouth open, containing a broken stick fitted inside. As they approached, they noticed smoke coming from behind the doll, which then levitated 5 feet in the air, as if held by a giant smoking tobacco in it. The tobacco smoke filled the room until the monkey doll dropped to the floor, and the bedroom door suddenly slammed shut. The lieutenant and detective tried to open it but couldn't, forcing them to break down the door to escape. Joy interpreted these events as the spirit living with her disliking visitors, as strange occurrences happened every time she had guests. Until one day, Joy was sleeping in her room as usual when she suddenly woke up to a strange sound approaching the door. She decided to call Detective Chris, who advised her to immediately leave the house. According to Joy, she refused to leave and couldn't even make it to the door. Soon, Joy started hearing rustling sounds coming from different parts of the room. She took her pillow and blanket and decided to lock herself in the bathroom, as its lock was the strongest in the house and the door was heavy. She brought the phone with her, extending its cord to the bathroom, then locked the door with both the chain and the key, and slept inside the bathroom only to wake up later to the same sound. Suddenly, the door began to shake violently until the lock broke, leaving only the chain intact. As the banging continued, Joy called Detective Chris again, but before she could ask for help, the phone cord was forcefully pulled, leading her to scream for Chris to come immediately, right before the cord was completely severed. Isolated from the outside world, with only a chain separating her from the giant spirit, Joy saw no other solution but to confront whatever was behind the door or jump from the bathroom window, which was 10 feet high. She chose to jump from the window as her last attempt to escape, and she fell to the ground in pain. At that moment, Detective Chris arrived in a police car and took her to the hospital. From then on, Joy decided she would never enter the house again unless accompanied, until she discovered the cause of these occurrences. She began inquiring about the house's previous occupant before her family moved in 50 years ago, learning that a French woman named Mrs. Chadell lived there. After her husband's death, her children decided to place her in a nursing home due to her annoying habits and constant domination over them. However, Mrs. Chadell refused to leave her house. On her last night, she escaped from the nursing home, returned to her house, and died there, her death undiscovered for a while since she had locked all doors and windows. Her children had to break in to enter. After learning the story, Joy decided to try communicating with Mrs. Chadell, convincing her that she was the new owner of the house. According to Joy, she managed to establish a spiritual connection with Mrs. Chadell, asking her to leave the house. Peace reigned in the house for a long time, until one day, Joy heard the voice of a strange woman with a French accent calling her, causing her to collapse completely and finally decide to leave the house.